This is my true story. After my wife passed away, my daughter became my whole world. I raised her alone, gave her everything I had, and believed she'd treat me with dignity in return. But instead, she mocked me. One night at dinner, she called me a burden, right in front of her husband, and when I cried, she laughed. But what she didn't know was, I recorded everything. And the next morning, I gave that recording to her husband. What happened after? She lost everything. Before I tell you how I did it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe, so my story reaches someone who needs to hear it. I was 34 years old when my wife died. She was the love of my life, smart, kind, and the only woman who ever understood my silences. We were raising a 6-year-old daughter then, our only child. After she passed, I stood in our kitchen that night with my daughter's tiny arms wrapped around my legs, crying. And I made a promise I would never break. I will never let her feel unloved. I will give her everything I have, even if it leaves me with nothing. And that's what I did. I became a father, a mother, a provider, a teacher, and sometimes just a quiet shadow in the background clapping for her, at piano recitals, at school plays, at college award nights. I worked 2 jobs for years. A city bus driver by day, a grocery clerk by night. Came home with aching feet and numb fingers, but still made sure she had a packed lunch every morning. She never knew how many nights I skipped dinner just to afford her dance shoes, or how many times I stitched my socks instead of buying new ones so I could pay for her field trips. But I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because I was her father. And that's what love looks like when it's real. When she turned 18, she got into college in another state. I remember sitting on the porch with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but pride. She hugged me and said, "Dad, I'll never forget what you've done for me." I believed her. When she got married, she wanted a small wedding. I offered her a big one. She refused, said she didn't want me to spend too much. But I paid for it anyway. Tux rentals, the venue, the photographer. It was my joy. Watching her walk down the aisle was one of the proudest moments of my life. She looked radiant. And her husband? A decent man, quiet but respectful. I thought, she chose well. She'll be happy. My job is done. But life had other plans. As she and her husband moved into their new home, I still tried to help. I gave them a portion of my retirement savings as a gift. "Use it for furniture," I said, "or put it in savings." She hugged me and cried. That was the last time I saw her cry out of gratitude. When my arthritis worsened and it became harder to live alone, she suggested I move in with them. I hesitated. I didn't want to be a burden. But she insisted. "You've done everything for me. Let me do this for you," she said. I packed my suitcase with a heart full of hope. I believed I was entering the next chapter of my life, one filled with warmth, laughter, and family. I thought she'd sit next to me sometimes, just to talk about life like we used to. I thought her husband and I would watch ball games together on Sundays. I thought her kids would call me grandpa with smiles and run into my arms when I brought them candy. I never expected that the home I helped build would become the place where I was slowly broken down. It started small, and like most men who've spent their lives enduring, I ignored it. The first time my daughter snapped at me, it was over a coffee cup. I had placed it in the wrong section of the dishwasher. She sighed loudly and said, "Dad, it's not 1970. We rinse them first now." I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. I guess old habits die hard. She didn't smile. She just rolled her eyes and walked away. Then it became routine. A comment here, a jab there. When I offered advice on home repairs, she'd scoff and say, "Dad, just let the plumber do it. You'll mess it up." When I offered to help with the kids' homework, she'd say, "It's new math, Dad. You wouldn't understand." When I told a story at the dinner table, she'd interrupt, "You've told that one already." Her husband always stayed silent, awkwardly sipping water, eyes flickering between us like he didn't know which side to take. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was being too old-fashioned. Maybe I was getting in the way. Maybe, like she said once, I just don't get how things work anymore. So I tried to be smaller. I stayed quiet during meals. I washed my cup and put it away without a sound. I folded my clothes neatly and kept my bedroom door closed most of the day. I didn't want to bother anyone. I thought, if I just give them space, maybe she'll come around. But she didn't. The jabs turned into sarcasm, the sarcasm into coldness, and the coldness into cruelty. She started correcting everything I said, even things that weren't wrong. She mocked my handwriting when I left a note on the fridge. She laughed when I asked for help turning on the smart TV. Once, I dropped a plate by accident. It shattered on the kitchen floor, and I immediately bent down, trembling, trying to clean it. She stood there, arms folded, and said, "God, you're helpless." Her husband came in, asked what happened, and she smiled and said, "Dad just had another senior moment." It wasn't the words that hurt the most. It was the way she said them. Not with anger, but with casual disdain. Like I was a joke she was tired of laughing at. A character in her sitcom, only good for eye rolls and punchlines. And still, I said nothing. Because she was my daughter. Because I had promised myself I would never raise my voice at her. Because I believed, somehow, if I stayed patient long enough, she would remember who I was. But what I didn't realize then was that she had changed. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a phase. This was who she had become. A woman so wrapped in her own world, she forgot the hands that once carried her through every storm. And it was all leading to the night that would shatter what little hope I had left. It was a Saturday evening. Her husband had grilled some chicken outside, and the kids were running around the backyard, chasing each other with foam swords and water guns. I had spent most of the day reading in my room, not wanting to get in anyone's way, but when I heard laughter and the clatter of plates in the kitchen, I decided to join them. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be one of those rare nights where I felt like part of a family again. I shuffled in slowly, careful not to seem intrusive, and sat at the far end of the table. No one really acknowledged me, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I simply smiled and complimented the food. Her husband nodded politely. Teehee kids ignored me, as usual. Then, halfway through dinner, the conversation shifted. She started talking about work. Someone new had joined her office and apparently didn't understand the software they used. She rolled her eyes and mimicked them in a voice that sounded intentionally dumb. Everyone laughed. And then suddenly, her eyes turned to me. "Kind of like Dad trying to figure out the microwave last week," she said. Her husband chuckled nervously. I smiled weakly. I wanted to let it pass, but she wasn't finished. "Seriously, Dad," she continued, now fully addressing me. "How did you even survive before we took you in? You can't work the TV. You can't figure out how to order groceries. You write notes like it's 1950. It's like we've adopted a third child." Her husband looked down at his plate. The kids were busy chewing, but I froze. I tried to brush it off with humor. Well, I guess I'm still learning. But something in her eyes had changed. She leaned forward and dropped her fork with a clatter. "Learning?" she said. "Dad, you're pathetic. You sit in your room all day doing nothing. You need help with every little thing, and you still think you're helping us by being here? Newsflash, you're not." I felt the blood drain from my face. The room spun. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. My eyes welled up before I could stop them. A tear slipped down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away with my sleeve, humiliated. I looked down at my plate, praying the conversation would move on. But it didn't, because that's when she laughed. Full, loud, sharp, the kind of laugh that cuts skin. "Oh my God," she said, pointing at me. "Are you seriously crying? Over that? Are you crying like a child at the dinner table? Her voice got higher, more mocking. She turned to her husband, gesturing. Look at him, crying, like a baby. This is what I deal with every day. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't look at anyone. I felt like I had been stripped naked in the middle of my own family and laughed at for bleeding. Her husband didn't say a word. He just glanced at me, a long, uncomfortable glance, and then looked away. I slowly pushed my plate forward, got up from my chair, and whispered, "Excuse me." I walked to my room, each step heavier than the last, each breath harder to take. I shut the door gently, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the floor for what felt like hours. The food sat in my stomach like a stone. Her words rang in my ears over and over again. Pathetic, embarrassing, a third child. I had sacrificed everything in my life for her. I had built her world, brick by brick, so she would never have to cry alone. And now, when I shed one tear, just one, she laughed. Not because she was shocked, but because she didn't care, because it was funny to her, because her father's pain had become her entertainment. That night, as I sat in silence, I didn't feel like a man. I didn't even feel like a human being. I felt like a mistake that had overstayed its welcome. But what she didn't know was, I had recorded everything. I sat alone in that room for what felt like hours, staring at the faded wallpaper and the shadows crawling along the floor. The laughter still echoed in my head like a cruel song stuck on repeat. But louder than the laughter was the silence that followed it. Her husband's silence, the children's silence, the silence of a room that had chosen to watch a man break without offering even a sliver of mercy. I hadn't cried like that in decades, not since I buried my wife, and even then, I had cried in private. But tonight, I cried in front of the people I called family, and the one person who should have comforted me, the child I raised with blood, sweat, and sleepless nights, mocked me like a school bully picking on someone too small to fight back. But what cut even deeper than her insults was the way she performed it. The way she leaned forward at the table with a crooked grin on her face and venom in her voice. Look at you, crying like a child. Embarrassing. That's what she said. Those exact words. I remember them because they felt like nails being hammered into the back of my neck. And she didn't whisper them. Number. She said them loud enough for her husband to hear. Loud enough for the kids to pause. Loud enough that the clatter of her fork against her plate felt like a gavel sentencing me to a life of shame. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry louder. I didn't slam my door or plead for understanding. I just stood there, quietly, and walked away. That's what she wanted, right? Silence. Disappearance. The dead weight finally shutting up. Later that night, I sat in the dark, unable to sleep. My stomach hurt, not from hunger, but from grief. I had seen many sad days in my life. I had walked through job loss, through funeral homes, through hospital waiting rooms. But none of them came close to the pain of hearing my own daughter laugh at the sight of my tears. And that pain, sharp as it was, turned slowly into something else. Something heavier, something quieter. Resolve. But here's the thing. She thought she was just venting. She thought her cruelty was confined to the four walls of that dining room. What she didn't know, what she had no idea about, was that I had left my phone recording on the table beside my plate, a habit I picked up after forgetting things too often. I used to record reminders, thoughts, appointments. That night, it was on. The microphone had caught everything, her words, her tone, her laughter. The exact moment my voice cracked, and her voice laughed. It was all there, untouched, undeniable. A full recording of who she had become. Not the daughter I raised, but the stranger she had chosen to be. I didn't know what to do with it at first. Part of me wanted to delete it and move on. Part of me thought maybe I deserved it, that maybe I was just a burden. But the more I listened to it, the more I realized something. This wasn't just about me. This was about truth, about respect, about consequences. And if she wasn't going to learn the hard way, maybe the truth would teach her for me. And the truth had a voice. It had a timestamp. And it lived in my phone. The next morning, while the house was still quiet, I brewed a cup of tea and waited at the kitchen table. Her husband came down first, as he always did, dressed in his collared shirt, briefcase in hand, pretending everything was fine. He greeted me politely, but cautiously, like a man who had witnessed something the night before he didn't know how to process. I gestured for him to sit. "I want to play you something," I said calmly. "Just listen. Don't speak until it's done." He hesitated, then sat across from me. I opened my phone, found the file, hit play. Her voice poured into the room like poison, clear, undeniable, sharp. "Seriously, Dad, you're pathetic. You sit in your room all day doing nothing. You're crying? Are you seriously crying? Look at you, crying like a child. Embarrassing." The sound of her laugh followed. Then silence, my shaky breath, my quiet exit. When it ended, I looked up. He wasn't blinking. His mouth was slightly open. His hand trembled on the table. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I mean, I heard it, but hearing it like this." He stood up, walked out of the kitchen. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. He had just heard the truth, and nothing was ever going to be the same again. He didn't come back downstairs for almost 2 hours. I stayed in the kitchen, sipping my cold tea, staring at the same spot on the floor where she had laughed the night before. I thought maybe he would brush it off. Maybe he'd rationalize it like I had done 100 times before. "She's stressed. She didn't mean it. She's just tired." But when he finally returned, his face looked different. Not just shocked, not just disappointed. He looked ashamed, not of himself, of her. He didn't speak to me. He just nodded, tight-lipped, and walked straight past the kitchen into the hallway, toward the stairs. I heard their bedroom door open, then silence, then raised voices. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable: betrayal, anger, disgust. I caught fragments. "How could you? Your own father. What kind of person?" And then her voice, defensive, loud, no apology in it. "He's exaggerating. He always acts like a victim. You're seriously taking his side?" That was the moment, right there. That last sentence. That's when I knew this wasn't just a bad night. This was who she was now. Someone who could mock the man who gave her life and feel justified. That night, I sat alone again. Not in shame, not in fear, not even in sadness, but in something deeper. I was grieving, not for myself, but for the daughter I had lost. The girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The teenager who used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder during movies. The young woman who once called me the best man I know. Where did she go? When did she trade love for convenience, respect for sarcasm, compassion for cruelty? The house was quiet for the rest of the evening. No dinner was called, no laughter from the kids, just closed doors and muffled tension. The next morning, her husband left early, earlier than usual. He didn't say goodbye, didn't even look at her. I watched him walk to his car, get in, and drive away. A few minutes later, she came down, hair messy, face tight with frustration. She looked at me, then looked away. No words, just that same bitterness she had worn like perfume for months. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't pleading. I just looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, I saw someone I didn't recognize, and I realized something. Love without respect isn't love. It's a leash, and I had been wearing it for too long. That day, I packed my bags, folded my clothes slowly, with care, took only what I brought when I moved in. I didn't slam doors. I didn't write a note. I just placed my suitcase by the door and waited for her husband to return. When he did, later that evening, I asked him calmly if he could drop me off at the local senior center. He looked startled, like he hadn't expected me to go. "You don't have to leave," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." I smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "I know, but I also don't belong here anymore." I turned to her one last time. She stood on the staircase, arms crossed, no emotion on her face. I said only one thing: "You mocked my tears, now you cry alone." And then I left. I've always believed that a man's word should be enough, that truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. But sometimes, people won't listen until you put a mirror in front of them and force them to see what they've become. That's what the recording was. A mirror. Cold, unbiased, and undeniable. I didn't record it out of vengeance. It wasn't premeditated. It was instinct, the habit of an old man who had started recording things on his phone to remember shopping lists, appointments, thoughts he didn't want to forget. That night, I had placed my phone beside my plate without thinking. A small part of me, maybe out of fear, maybe out of exhaustion, just hit record before dinner started. Maybe I knew something inside her had changed, or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I played it back, I realized it was more than just memory. It was evidence. I listened to it alone in my room that night. Her voice was clear, sharp, unfiltered. The insults didn't sound exaggerated. In fact, they sounded worse than I remembered. Her tone had venom I hadn't even registered in the moment. The exact moment my voice cracked and my breathing hitched, her laughter exploded across the audio like a slap in the face. "Are you crying? Like a child? Embarrassing." Those weren't fragments I misheard. They were facts, frozen in sound, stamped with a time and date. I played it again, then again, not to hurt myself, but to confirm what I had felt in my bones for months. This wasn't just tension. It wasn't aging. It wasn't miscommunication. It was emotional abuse, casual, chronic, and cruel. I saved the file and backed it up to a USB drive. I labeled it simply TuesdayDinner.mp3. I didn't add anything fancy, no explanation, just the truth. That's all I needed. The next morning, as I sat quietly in the living room with my suitcase packed and resting at my feet, I held that USB in my hand like a stone. I had a decision to make. Do I leave quietly and carry the shame forever? Or do I expose it, not for revenge, but for justice? I had raised this woman. I had walked her through every illness, every heartbreak, every scraped knee and broken curfew. And now I had to decide whether I would protect her from the truth or protect myself with it. I chose the latter. When her husband came home that evening, he looked more exhausted than usual. There were dark circles under his eyes and tension in his jaw. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where it all happened. I slid the USB across to him and said, "Everything you need to know about what's happening in this house is on that file." He looked confused at first. Then he asked, "Is this from the other night?" I nodded. "It's unedited. Just listen when you're alone." He didn't say anything more, just slipped it into his briefcase and left the table. That night, I heard no laughter from their bedroom, no conversations, just silence. The next morning, he avoided eye contact. Didn't speak much. I could tell. He had listened. I could see it in the way he looked at her now. Not with love, not even with anger, but with disgust. He never told me what part hit him hardest. Maybe it was her tone. Maybe it was how casually she laughed while I cried. Maybe it was just the realization that the woman he married, the woman he built a life with, was not who he thought she was. But the look on his face said it all. The truth had landed, and there was no going back. I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to explain myself. The recording spoke louder than I ever could. The confrontation didn't happen with shouting. It didn't happen with plates flying or doors slamming. It began, as most reckonings do, with silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any argument. The morning after I handed him the recording, her husband didn't kiss her goodbye. He didn't ask what she wanted for dinner. He didn't say a word. He just poured his coffee, stared out the window like something inside him had cracked, and left the house without looking back. That's when she knew something had changed. By midday, I could feel the tension in the walls. She stomped through the kitchen, slamming drawers. She called him twice, no answer. She went upstairs, then came down, then back up again. Then finally, I heard her call out my name from the living room. Her voice was tight, clipped. "Dad, what did you give him?" I didn't look up from my chair. I just said, "The truth." She didn't like that answer. "What truth? What are you even talking about? What did you do?" I stood up, walked past her without a word, and left the house. I didn't owe her anything anymore. Not an explanation, not a conversation. I went to the park for a few hours, sat on a bench, and listened to the wind. I breathed. I existed, quietly, without insult. When I returned later that evening, the storm had broken. He was home. His suitcase was by the door. Not hers, his. The kids weren't around. I think she sent them to her sister's house or somewhere safe, which told me she knew what was coming. She was crying. First time I'd seen her cry in years, but not the kind of tears that come from pain. These were the tears of someone cornered, exposed. She looked up at me like I was the villain in her story now. "You destroyed my marriage," she said. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Her husband stood to the side, arms crossed, silent. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just looked her in the eye and said, "I didn't destroy your marriage. Your own words did that." He finally spoke then. His voice was cold, controlled. I didn't want to believe it. But hearing you talk to your father like that, hearing you laugh at him while he cried, it made me sick. She tried to interrupt, but he raised his hand. "You didn't just humiliate him. You revealed who you really are. And I can't be married to someone who treats the man who raised her with that kind of cruelty." Her face twisted. "He's manipulating you." He held up the USB stick. "Number, you did that all by yourself. This is your voice, your words, your laugh." She started crying harder. "Please, you don't understand. He's been difficult. He's always acting like a victim." I stepped forward then, just once, calm, steady. I said, "You mocked my tears, called me pathetic, laughed like it was entertainment. Now you want sympathy? From the man you betrayed?" She fell quiet. Her husband grabbed his suitcase, walked to the door, turned back once and said, "I'm taking the kids. I'll call you when I figure things out." Then he left. The door closed. And for the first time in years, the house was quiet. Not from tension, but from consequences. She turned to me. Her mouth opened, but no words came. And I walked past her, just like she used to walk past me. Because now, finally, she was the one left alone with silence. The fallout wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, like watching paint peel off a wall you spent your whole life building. After her husband left, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't the usual tension I had grown used to, the kind where you tiptoe around pride and attitude. No, this was different. It was the silence of collapse, the kind that follows a storm after everything has been broken and there's nothing left to cover up. She didn't speak to me for the first 2 days. Not a word. She moved around the house like a ghost, eyes swollen, hair unbrushed, muttering to herself, replaying the argument in her head. I could hear her through the walls, whispering his name, cursing under her breath. She wasn't sorry for what she said. She was sorry she got caught. That was the difference. She never came to my room to apologize, never said, I was wrong, never asked how I felt. All she cared about now was how to fix her image, her life, her version of the story. By the third day, she tried to talk. She knocked on my door, gentle, like she was the one wounded. I opened it, stood there in silence. Her eyes were red, her voice thin. Dad, I didn't mean it. I was just frustrated. I nodded slowly. Frustration doesn't make someone cruel. It just reveals who they already are. She flinched, then tried again. I was under pressure. You were always around. I felt trapped. I didn't argue. I just asked, do you remember when you were 12 and I worked 2 shifts just to buy you that violin you never played? She blinked. I continued. Do you remember when your boyfriend cheated on you in college and I drove 5 hours that night just to bring you home? She looked down. I took a step forward, my voice still steady. Do you remember when you had your first miscarriage and I sat outside the hospital room for 11 hours holding your coat because I didn't want you to come out and feel cold? Her tears came then. Real ones, maybe. Maybe not. I remember, she whispered. Then you should have remembered before you opened your mouth, I said. She didn't respond, just stood there, shattered in the doorway, trying to piece herself together with empty hands. Her husband didn't come back. Not after a week, not after a month. He called once to say he had filed for separation and temporary custody, said he had recorded his own statement, not about her as a wife, but as a mother who could humiliate her father in front of their children and not blink. He said, they need better. I didn't argue. The neighborhood started whispering. People noticed he was gone, that the kids weren't around, that her car sat in the driveway but no music played in the yard anymore. She used to throw dinner parties, walk around in heels, laughing with her wine glass in hand. Now she wore the same sweatshirt for days. Now people crossed the street when they saw her coming, not out of fear, out of disappointment. They had all heard the story, not from me, but from him. Quietly, respectfully, he had let the truth speak, and it spread like wind through dry leaves. Her boss called, gave her a week's leave, then never called again. I found out she was removed from 2 local volunteer boards, the ones where she used to boast about being so involved. She had spent years building her image, but all it took was 48 seconds of audio for the world to hear who she really was. She begged me once, 2 weeks later, really begged. Got on her knees beside the chair where I sat reading, hands shaking. Please, Dad, just tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him I was upset. Tell him you forgive me. I looked at her for a long time, not with anger, not even with sadness, just with the quiet understanding of someone who had been broken too many times by the same hands. I closed my book, and I said, you mocked my tears, and now you cry alone. I stood up, left her there on the carpet, knees down, head in her hands. I didn't slam the door behind me. Some goodbyes don't need noise. After I walked out of that room, I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't need to. Because some doors, once closed, are meant to stay closed. I didn't move out immediately, not because I was waiting for forgiveness or hoping for change, but because I had nowhere else to go yet. I slept in that house like a guest who overstayed, not because I was unwelcome, but because there was nothing left to connect me to it. The photos on the walls didn't matter anymore. The laughter in the memories had been poisoned. The child I raised, the woman I thought I knew, had turned into a stranger, and strangers don't get second chances. In the following weeks, she tried to carry on like things were normal. She made coffee in the mornings, played music in the kitchen, tried asking me questions like, "Do you want anything from the store?" But I didn't play along. I answered when necessary, politely, calmly. I wasn't cold. I was done. That's a difference people don't talk about enough. I wasn't punishing her. I was releasing myself. From her moods, from her games, from the weight of hoping she would return to being the person I once believed she was. The house was quieter now, not with peace, with loss. She walked from room to room like someone looking for a version of herself that had vanished. The woman with the husband, the woman with the tidy life, the woman who once laughed freely because she thought nothing could touch her. Now, every laugh had stopped. Every mirror reminded her of what she did, not just to me, but to her children, her marriage, her name. I found out from a neighbor that her husband had moved in with his brother 2 towns over. He had already filed for divorce, primary custody, full split of assets, citing emotional instability and prolonged disrespect toward family elders. His lawyer used the recording, the same one she laughed over. Now it was evidence. Now it was her undoing. She tried to contest it, claimed stress, emotional exhaustion, even hinted at me being manipulative. But none of it held. Because when you laugh at someone crying and the world hears it, there's no explaining that away. One evening, I came home from a walk and found her sitting in the living room, surrounded by photo albums. She was crying again, quietly this time, the real kind. She looked up at me as I entered, tears streaking her cheeks, and asked, "Do you still think I'm that person?" I stared at her for a long moment. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to remind her of every insult, every eye roll, every meal I ate in silence while she talked about me like I wasn't in the room. But instead, I just said, "I don't think about you that much anymore." And I meant it. She was no longer the center of my heartbreak. She was just a chapter I had closed. That night, I emailed the local senior residence, the same one where my old friend Leo had moved the year before. They had a waiting list. But when I explained my situation, they made room, said I could move in by the weekend. I packed my things slowly, not in bitterness, but in relief. I folded my shirts carefully, hung my coat by the door, zipped my suitcase without ceremony. She asked me twice if I needed help. I said no both times. On my final morning in her house, she tried one last time, followed me to the car, hands shaking. "Dad, please, just don't leave like this." I looked at her, really looked at her, not as my daughter, but as a person who had made her choices. And I said, "You called me pathetic for crying. You mocked the man who raised you. You turned my tears into entertainment. I don't hate you, but I can't trust you. And trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild on apologies. It rebuilds on change, and I haven't seen any." Then I got into the car. She didn't follow. She didn't call. She just stood there, on the driveway, watching me go. The way I had once watched her walk away after every insult, every laugh, every moment she chose pride over love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. The senior residence was small, nothing fancy, nothing loud, but it was warm. It smelled like clean wood floors and fresh tea. People said good morning and actually meant it. The staff called me Mr. Keller, and no one rolled their eyes when I asked how to work the remote. There was a garden in the back where I spent my mornings with a cup of tea, watching birds flutter between the hedges. On Wednesdays, we played chess. On Sundays, a retired teacher read poetry in the common room. It wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. And peace, I learned, was the most luxurious thing of all. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who spoke to me with respect. Not because I earned it, but because everyone here had stories. Everyone here had lost someone. Everyone knew that growing old didn't mean becoming worthless. It meant surviving. That kind of dignity, you can't fake it. You either learn it through life, or you spend your life mocking the people who did. In those quiet weeks, I finally breathed. Deep, full breaths. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I didn't have to measure my words, lower my voice, or brace myself for a sigh when I spoke. If I cried during a movie, no one laughed. If I told a story twice, someone still listened. and I never once had to record a conversation to protect myself again. That's when I realized I hadn't just escaped a bad situation. I had reclaimed something: my worth, my voice, my right to feel, my right to cry without shame. Her husband called once, just to check in. He had full custody of the kids now, said they were adjusting, slowly. He didn't bring her up, and I didn't ask. We talked about baseball, old movies, and good tea. Before hanging up, he said, "Thank you for giving me the truth." I told him, sometimes the truth isn't kind, but it's always necessary. I never saw her again after that. She sent a letter once. I didn't open it, because some apologies don't come in envelopes. They come in action, in change, in years spent proving you've unlearned your cruelty. And she hadn't earned that yet, not from me. I kept the USB drive in a drawer at my new place, not out of spite, but as a reminder, not of her words, but of the moment I finally chose to defend myself, not with shouting, not with anger, but with the power of simply saying, "Enough." And that's how it ends. She laughed at my tears, so I played her cruelty back to the one person she couldn't lie to, and it cost her everything: her marriage, her reputation, her false image. But me, I got my dignity back. I found a home where I could cry and still be seen as a man, and I no longer live in fear of being mocked for feeling something deeply. She tried to make a joke out of my pain. I made sure the world heard the punchline: "You mocked my tears, and now you cry alone."